Good morning. I want to thank everybody for joining us for our apparatus webinar featuring Chris Heacock as he presents Lync Enterprise Voice. I just wanted to let you know that please feel free to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll get those answered as quickly as possible. You can do that through just typing them in. We just definitely want to make this as interactive as we possibly can. I also wanted to let you know that we will be recording the webinar to make it available for you afterwards. And following the webinar, we'll be sending you a copy of our guide, Harness the Full Power of Lync, for joining us today. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to our very own Microsoft Certified Master, Chris Heacock.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to hear you. I don't know if everyone's hearing an echo. We'll try to get that addressed on our end. Thanks for joining this morning. I see there's a couple folks here. One of them I recognize as a customer, and it's good to see you. As Mary Beth mentioned, the goal behind this webinar is just to kind of walk through at a high level Lync Enterprise Voice, what that entails, how big and how small it can be, and some of the scenarios moving forward for a company that's considering Lync, but maybe is not quite sure what enterprise voice means or how they're going to interact with it. So it may feel high level. I think that's great. As Mary Beth mentioned, if you have questions, you can ask it here. There's an IM channel for those of you that are signed in and see this in Lync. You can instant message. Myself and Mary Beth will try to get those questions and answer them. If you don't want to speak, that's fine. If you want to email, that's okay. But if you'd like to speak, feel free to unmute yourself and interject. There's going to be a time at the end of this where we can take more formal questions, and obviously we can go back and forth through the slide deck and address things as needed. So with that, let's begin. Here's kind of a high-level agenda. Hopefully everybody can see the slide deck. We tested it and looked like it was working on our end. So I'm going to cover a little bit of the history of enterprise voice, a little bit of Enterprise Voice 101, just to sort of lay some groundwork. And then we'll get right into some deployment scenarios, talk about resiliency, which is a big part of Lync, especially in 2013, a little bit of planning, and then some talk about devices. Device is one of those things oftentimes forgotten until the last minute, which can be a significant cost and also a significant deployment roadblock if you don't at least think about it thoroughly before you begin. So the story so far. For everybody on the phone, I'm just going to assume that if you've got questions, you can ask them. So starting back, there was a product that's not on this roadmap called Live Communications, which was a 2005 LCS Live Communication Server, and that was a kind of a first foray for Microsoft into instant messaging space. Starting an Office Communication Server, they began offering what they called Core Enterprise Voice. Simultaneous ringing, unified messaging, and RCC, which is remote call control, were all introduced. How good it was, that's obviously debatable. Few people deployed this seriously, and I think as much as anything else, nobody knew what to do with it. It seemed like a good idea. It wasn't sophisticated enough to be a PBX in the enterprise, so a few people tested it, used it for a couple ideas, but it wasn't something that was really rolled out significantly. In 2007 R2, you can see they added some significant new features. What they still didn't have was the kind of resiliency outside of the media here you can see, but outside of that there wasn't enough enterprise capacity or testing or availability or scalability to move an enterprise into this full time. Device support was weak. You had to use a thick client. They had some mobile support, but outside voice control gave you the capability of controlling a phone call and sending it to your cell phone and having it monitored and managed through Office Communication Server, but it wasn't sophisticated enough to be a full-time PBX. Starting in Lync 2010, this is where Microsoft made a huge leap forward into the enterprise voice space by putting in survivability, some of these enterprise features like call and mission control, media bypass, location information services. These are all really critical functions with regards to enterprise voice planning. Without call and mission control, it became difficult to throttle connections between sites. Media bypass meant that if you put gateways in strategic locations, all the media was having to traverse office communication server, and prior had to go through the server no matter what. So you had to have a mediation server farm that was big enough to run every single call. With media bypass, you have the ability to send traffic straight to gateways in inappropriate locations and not have to burden the mediation server or scale it out nearly as much. And then location information is really critical for 911 planning when you start talking about mobile endpoints. A phone on a desk in a building is very easy to know. When someone dials 911 from that phone, you know what happens. But in Lync 2010, I can take my laptop with a soft phone into a whole other area, and then what happens? When you're in that space, you run a risk where, well, I normally sit at this desk, but now I've moved to another building. How does Lync know that if I dial 911 to send the ambulance to that building and not to the location that I'm normally in? So location information is very critical in that space, and that was introduced in 2010. In 2010, they actually had their PBX stack really gut checked, and it held up to all kinds of enterprise, level performance metrics, 4 million calls, and it didn't, collapse underneath that. So in 2010, that's where you'll hear the term enterprise voice being really utilized as an actual viable platform. And then in Lync 2013, if I can get this silly thing to work here, we add some new features as well. Group pickup, mobile voice over IP, so now all the mobile clients can make and receive phone calls, video calls, audio calls on the mobile clients without utilizing the cellular network for telephony at all, if you choose to do so. M-to-N routing, inter-trunk routing, and a little bit more caller ID handling, and then voicemail escape, which was a perpetual complaint with Lync 2010. Real quick, I just see a couple of people have joined. As at the intro we mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to chime in. If you'd like to ask a question over the phone, you can unmute yourself and ask a question. If you'd like to type it in chat or send an email, feel free to do that, and we can interact with them in real time, but at the end we'll have a time for questions as well. So that kind of leads us to where we are today. Let's talk a little bit about Enterprise Voice 101. So when we talk about Lync especially, you'll hear the word topology thrown around a lot. It's really critical to Lync. It's where everything begins. You have to build a topology. And so Enterprise Voice is no different. You still have to have a topology. It still needs to be viable. The first key part of this is the mediation server role. For many companies, this is going to be something that's inbuilt. It's intrinsic to your environment. It's going to be on there. If you just built a regular Lync infrastructure and you turned on Enterprise Voice, the mediation server is going to be co-located. That's usually good for most people, but in the event that it isn't, you can separate that out, but it has to be there. A gateway, a PSTN gateway is critical. A media gateway for TDM, so this would be if you had PRI lines or analog lines. You'd have a gateway that interfaces and turns all those analog interfaces into SIP interfaces, or a session border controller, which is a pure SIP device. Basically just make sure that the carrier's SIP stack is being fulfilled and the Lync SIP stack is being fulfilled. The second session border controller, in some regards, I would say maybe it's not necessarily debatable, but some people would say that I've seen things that say Lync 2013 supports native SIP trunking straight from the carrier. This is true. In certain circumstances, you don't necessarily have to put in a session border controller. We tend to recommend them because it gives you a lot more flexibility on how you deploy Lync and the depth of that deployment. If you wanted to support third-party devices, or if you needed to interact with alternate PBX systems, handle faxing, certain things that Lync doesn't handle automatically with a session border controller on your premises, now you don't have to worry about that. Whatever changes may come from your carrier, you can easily absorb and handle. And then there's the trunk that goes between the gateway and the Lync server. So that would be provided by that gateway or that session border controller. And with those three things, I've got Lync, I've got a gateway, and I've got a connection between the two. We can now deploy Enterprise Voice. And this scales up just as you'd imagine. If you needed to add more mediation servers for capacity or resiliency or additional gateways for those two reasons, no problem. You can do that just by throwing them in there, and then the SIP side of the house that Lync is managing will take care of that. Awesome. So when we talk about deployment scenarios with Lync, it really boils down to these three. Now there's a lot of ways that we could look at these three and some variance in that. But effectively, you're either going to retain your PBX and deploy Lync as not the PBX with really no connectivity to the PBX at all, almost just a secondary system. You could either then you could connect it to the PBX in some manner. So now they are two separate systems, but there's some sort of integration between the two, and we'll talk more about that here in a bit. And then the third scenario is full PBX replacement. This is the scariest one for most folks, but it's completely viable. It's many deployments by now, and it can absolutely function as a full tilt PBX. The reason that you'll see all three of these things mentioned is specifically because different enterprises at different spaces with different challenges may want to deploy Lync. They may be looking specifically at something like instant messaging or desktop sharing or group chat or something along those lines. But we already have a phone system. We're not really ready to bite that off just yet. We may in the future, but for now we really need some of these other core features of Lync. Great. We're happy to deploy Lync on its own. Don't even bother with the phone. We could connect them to some degree, and then in the event that you're ready to go, just replace everything and put Lync in place for all the work streams you're targeting in addition to voice. So let's dive into these a bit. So retaining the PBX, this is a simple one. The PBX is used for all telephony features. Lync is deployed in parallel and provides these other work streams that the PBX does not. IM and presence, PC audio, video, and conferencing. Right now, we're all connected to a Lync conference. This is hosted by Apparatus on our Lync servers. I see that there's some folks that have joined with the web client, and there's somebody that's dialed in as well. So in this scenario where you've retained the PBX, there is no integration between the Lync and the PBX. So Lync is not going to be handling dial-in. Now, you could handle this conference as we're having it right now, but there'd be no dial-in access. Everybody would have to join with a Lync client. That's not a bad thing necessarily, especially if you're like, we're going to be doing a PBX replacement. I don't want to spend any time integrating until I know exactly what we're going to do. No problem. This scenario will fulfill that. So at this stage, Lync is over there, PBX is over there, everything but voice. Lync's taking care of that. Voice, that's still the PBX's job. Pardon me. The second scenario, and this offers a couple options, is connecting with the PBX. So remote call control, the reason that this always comes up first is this was, for the longest time, the way to integrate with a PBX. In this scenario, the PBX owns the telephony, just as before. The difference is Lync is controlling it remotely. Now, I'll talk a little bit about this further because I think it bears a bit more discussion. But at the end of the day, it does offer the opportunity to integrate the phone presence. RCC will provide back that the phone is off hook or on hook. But this is something that's mutually exclusive to Enterprise Voice. So you're going to have to license Enterprise Voice to take advantage of this. Even if, I'm not even handling PBX. If the PBX is over there, why do I need to license Enterprise Voice? That's the mechanism they chose to do this. So we talk a little bit about the other integration mode here. This is SIP integration with the PBX. So this is, you've got a direct SIP or maybe a gateway between Lync and the PBX. When you've done this, what Lync sees effectively is just a SIP trunk. So as far as Lync's concerned, it is now Enterprise Voice enabled. It has some numbers that are going to call into it via a trunk. It has a trunk that it can use to dial out. And because of that, you now have Lync Enterprise Voice deployed. This will give you dial-in conferencing. And as you deploy Lync to selected pilot users, the reason that bullet is there is in this scenario, you're effectively going to have two PBXs. Your main PBX, where all the calls are coming in, that's where the initial call routing is going to happen. That PBX will have a responsibility to say, for the following pilot numbers, scaling up as needed to all of my Lync users that are Enterprise Voice enabled, I'm going to route those calls to the Lync server directly. I used to ring a phone on a desk, but they've told me now on the PBX, they've told me that number is being handled by a different PBX down the line, so I'm going to forward that on. And then Lync receives that call and says, oh, a phone call coming in for Chris Heacock. I'm going to ring his endpoints as I'm instructed to do. Lync is not really aware of the PBX as a separate entity. If you dial a number of a PBX user, Lync will just say, oh, that's an external number, send it out the trunk. That trunk is the PBX, and the PBX would then route that call and send it to a PBX user. But Lync's, as far as Lync's concerned, this integration is effectively, I have a set of numbers, and then everything else, I send out my trunk. So if I dial the cell phone, it's going to go out the same trunk as if I dial the PBX user, because that trunk tie line between Lync and the PBX is the way that it's integrated. So as I explain this, the top one, remote call control, sounds like maybe that's a pretty good fit, right? I now have the ability to keep my phones on PBX, and I can put it on the desk, and now I can tell Lync to dial with the phone, and it's basically controlling that phone remotely. And the reason that this is slowly kind of going the way of the dodo in that regard is the way that Lync works is so much different than the way traditional PBX works, that when you engage remote call control, you start to get feedback from users that they're having some frustrations when it comes to answering their phone from any Lync client. So a scenario would be similar to this. Let's say I have a traditional PBX and I have a phone sitting on a desk. I turn on remote call control with Lync. I plumb it up to my account. It now knows that this extension to this handset on my desk is my number. I'm at work. The phone rings. I get a notification in Lync. A toast pops up and says, a phone call's coming in to you. What would you like to do? And I say, answer the phone. I hear the phone on my desk ringing. I hit answer the phone. The phone on the desk picks up. I have a conversation. And I hang up the phone. And I say, that's great. I mean, that's the perfect scenario. Then later on in the day, maybe I got out of work early, or I had a meeting that ran short, so I take a couple minutes. I jump online at Panera Bread. I sign into Lync once again, and I'm conducting some IMs, and a phone call comes in on my desk phone. The phone on my desk at the office, hooked to the PBX, begins to ring. Remotely, I get a toast in Lync that pops up and says, "You've got an incoming call." I say, "Oh, great! That call's." I get an incoming call. I'm here in the coffee shop. That's convenient because I could take it here, I guess. I hit answer. In so doing, it instructs the PBX to answer the phone, and the phone on my desk in the office, where I am not, answers. So they hear silence. I'm talking, and hello, I don't hear anything because my computer isn't really answering the call. All Lync has done is tell the PBX that I would like the call to be answered. So this scenario is very real. We've had a couple customers go through this exact scenario where they deployed it, felt like a good enough stopgap, but as users began to interact with it, it was nothing but frustration. They were, you have to educate people, don't answer the phone unless you're actually at a phone. They tried deploying some soft clients that hook to the PBX so that if I'm running Lync remotely, I need to sign into my soft phone remotely. And then when Lync tells the PBX to answer the phone, it'll actually answer the soft phone on my client. And that's a viable workaround. The trick is your users need to be aware that there's an additional process to be able to do that. And as anyone that's had to deal with end users, for a long time, it can be very frustrating when you've got something that is working as far as they're concerned, and now you're going to make a change and effectively add complexity and not give them much benefit. It's the same old phone and it's the same old process and the same old call features, but now I have to be careful that when I use this new technology, Lync that's here, that I take the proper steps to be able to have it interact with the old platform, without issue. So remote call control in that regard has become a frustration. You'll still hear some PBX vendors citing it as an integration point, but it's not impossible, and it's still usable in some scenarios, but it's something that I would be cautious about just because of what that could mean for your end users, as well as your ability to scale and grow in the telephony space. So when we talk about this, here's a little diagram that kind of explains this. So this is the direct SIP approach. You've got your cloud over here. Let's see if I can get this pointer up. Here's your PSTN cloud. Your telco company is bringing a trunk into your PBX, and you've got your phones that are hooked to that PBX. From the PBX, we've just got a traditional SIP trunk straight to Lync server, where you've got all of your Lync users that are going to be, enterprise voice enabled with a direct SIP trunk. So Lync says, Chris's number is I'm in charge of that number. So when I see a call come in, I ring his phone. If I call a PBX user, it goes out this SIP trunk. The PBX knows that number, sends it to here. If I call a cell user, Lync sends it out the same trunk. The PBX then sends it out the telco trunk to ring a cellular user out here. So here's a scenario that's similar with the gateway upstream phenomenon. So this is still a SIP integration, but this is a scenario where maybe you've got a larger PSTN gateway, and several PBXs. Content view back. All right, so in this scenario here, we've got a PSTN gateway that's upstream from a PBX. I'm an end user. I'm a Lync user. I make a call to a PBX user. I traverse the SIP trunk to a PSTN gateway, which could be a large session border control or something that's scalable to handle maybe tons of calling, lots of concurrent sessions. I dial a PBX user. From here, the gateway says, oh, we got an ISDN trunk to a PBX, ring the PBX user. If I dial an external user, it's going to hit Lync, traverse the same SIP trunk, and then the PSTN gateway's job is to send this trunk out to a cellular user. So it's much the same flow, but the key thing to note here is that Lync effectively has a trunk out. While we're integrating with the PBX, we're picking a point, putting in a SIP trunk, or you'll hear those called tie lines occasionally. That entire exercise is to get from A to get Lync a connectivity pipeline out for calling. And once that's done, you rely on your current PBX or gateway infrastructure, routing, etc., to handle all the call management from there. All right. Hold on a second. Things confused about who the presenter is, apparently. All right. So let's connecting with the PBX. Intra-trunk routing. So this is going to be connecting these together. You do get session management with that. You can route calls via the mediation server to the IP PBX gateway. It's not a common scenario, and the reason that you're going to see that it's not a common scenario is because most people don't need to deploy Lync and then use Lync to connect PBXs together. You would have PBX network in place, all your phone network in place, and you want to integrate Lync with it. In this scenario, you can see that you'd have the calls, the mediation servers effectively between your PBXs. So if you think about what this would mean architecturally, this is I've got several PBXs, they're already deployed and operational, but I'm going to go in and basically reconfigure all of them to accommodate Lync. If you're making that decision, you'd likely say, can I just use Lync? Is that an option for me? And if so, let's do that. And in the event that it isn't an option for me to use Lync, then I'm not going to do that at all. Just pipe Lync into a single place, use it for a pilot. But this would be a pretty complex scenario just to throw Lync in the mix. But it can be done. So Lync 2013 does add the ability to route between trunks. That wasn't there in 2010. So this is something that's worth mentioning in this scenario, though, where we want to use Lync, but we need to leverage Lync to handle routing between all of our PBXs. So replace the PBX. This is the final deployment scenario. This is the one that you'll hear Microsoft encouraging you to do the most. And then obviously it's no surprise that I would probably say the same thing just because of what this means for your Lync work stream, your Lync interaction. So this is they mentioned two things. Greenfield deployment. So let's say you don't have a PBX. You've got some analog lines and you're looking to put in something a little bit more significant, get some enterprise features. Fantastic. This Lync is effectively your Rev 1 PBX. Greenfield deployment meaning there's not a thing standing up. Let's just go turn Lync on. If it's not a greenfield deployment and you already have a PBX in place or maybe several PBXs, the best way to do that, right, would be, or another option, I guess, would be a flash cutover. So this is where I've deployed enterprise voice, I've tested it, I've brought in a SIP trunk, I've put some test numbers through it, everything seems to be ringing okay, I've got all the numbers reallocated to users. At this point, I'm going to effectively take my fire hose of voice, the SIP trunk, and aim it from the PBX to Lync. And once you've done that, Lync now starts to answer those phone calls instead of the PBX, starts ringing Lync endpoints instead of the PBX phones, and then Lync's going to use that same trunk for all of its outbound calling. The benefit to this is that you can roll it back by just pointing it back at the PBX. So you still have phones on desks, you still have clients deployed where they've always been. When you make that cutover, those clients stop ringing, the Lync clients start. Towards the end of that, we're having problems, or the installation of Lync went haywire, we're missing some things, and we're getting errors. Well, roll it back for now, and let's troubleshoot that deployment. Maybe we scaled it wrong. Maybe we picked the wrong location for our data centers, and we're seeing some latency in voice that we weren't anticipating. So let's figure out the issue. But in the meantime, you can roll it back because all you're really doing is redirecting your inbound phone calling between these two PBXs, the legacy PBX and Lync. So this is wonderful only because Lync does not have to deal with interaction with the PBX. It's a little bit more with regards to how Lync's going to work. You're going to get full features and a lot less confusion. You don't have half the users over here and some over there. And for you folks on Lync, you can do this, that, and the other folks, you still have to do it this way. And then that doesn't even hardly touch on the system admin side, which is far simpler if I don't have to manage and babysit two PBXs. Pardon me, I grab a drink. So you can see a diagram. I've got a PBX and a PST and gateway. I'm a PBX user. The traditional call flow prior to this was call came into the gateway, went to the PBX, rang the phone. When you do the cutover, the call is going to hit this, trunk over to Lync server. So once this is fired up, these are no longer in force. And then if you decide to push the trunk back over to here, then effectively the Lync users are not in force. The key difference here is that you don't have a split environment where there's several PBX users and then several Lync users and a lot of calls going back and forth through here being managed through this gateway. It's effectively one or the other. We're going to do the PBX or we're going to do Lync. All right, so let's talk about resiliency. This is obviously a hot topic in general, but this is something that Lync has really focused on a lot, and in many ways more so than some other, I'd say, my small medium business PBX vendors. All right, there's native voice resiliency. The point of this is we ensure voice functionality even in the event of a data center, pool, or WAN failure. Now, if you lose all your data centers, all your pools, and all your WANs, you're going to lose voice. But this is clearly focused at, well, what happens, how resilient can I be? How much redundancy is supported by voice? So let's talk about some key concepts, and we'll touch on these here. Sites, central versus branch. This is kind of a topology thing. Media bypass, survivable branch appliances. You'll see those references SBAs. A survivable branch server is an SBS. They're basically the same code base, but the appliance is an appliance, and the server is something that you have a little bit more flexibility on deployment. And then the client resiliency mode. None of these are necessarily new concepts for 2013, but they're very, very key enterprise voice concepts for Lync in general. So central and branch sites. In Lync, when you're creating a topology, you either have a central site or a branch site. The entire point of this, if you're looking at this, you're thinking, well, why wouldn't I just make all central sites? Totally could do that. Every time you stand up a pool, you can make it a central site. You have the option at a branch site of using a survivable branch appliance versus a pool, and an SBA can only be in a branch site. So that's the biggest delineator. The reason you would ever organize anything in this manner is going to be based around where do you see functionality being handled and how are you going to scale your organization? So branch sites, users in the branch sites get most of their functionality from the central site pool. This is part of the, decision-making process. If you've got a bunch of branch sites in your topology, they're still going to be pulling a lot of what known as user services from the central site. So if you lose the central site, all these would be handled down into resiliency modes. Potentially. And so you want to know, well, it makes sense maybe that instead of putting in one central site and let's say 80 branch sites, maybe I should do 3 central sites and 30 branch sites per, so that I don't overload my central site inadvertently by thinking that things are going to scale right. So as you go into and talk about topology and the deployment and stuff like that, a lot of the time that we spend here at Apparatus is talking through what's it look like today? How are you going to scale this in the future? Do you see any new acquisitions coming in? Are you looking to buy new facilities? Are you going to move to another building in another place? And how do we want to lay out this topology to maintain flexibility in the areas that you need it? And Lync's going to provide that as long as it's done properly up front. So infrastructure that's deployed at the branch sites provides mediation and registration functionality for local Lync users. So effectively your calls can be routed through regardless of if the central site's online. The small infrastructure, as you choose, will allow you to maybe make and receive phone calls in spite of the central site or the WAN link being down, which is the entire point of resiliency, right? If there's a need for a small site to maintain voice contact no matter what happens, it's so critical. Lync's going to provide that ability. Another key component here is media bypass. And I think I may have hinted on this a little bit, but when you talk about bypassing media in the world of real-time voice, voice is one of those things that time is of the essence, I guess, right? If the number that you'll hear cited occasionally is 200 milliseconds. If there's more than 200 milliseconds of latency between two endpoints in voice, call quality is typically deemed unacceptable. Basically what we're saying is if it takes too long for me to get my voice to you, we cannot have a conversation. The delay is obvious. It becomes a nuisance. The conversation begins to get drawn out, and people just don't want to bother with it. They'll hang up and say, something's wrong. It's all echoey, or you're talking anyway. So bearing that in mind, there's a lot of steps that could be taken to say, well, how do I make sure that the media itself, this is the actual voice communication, is not getting hung up from A to B? Enter media bypass. So this entire notion is I want to get the least amount of actual distance between my voice and your ear. So there's two things you'll see here on this slide. There's a signaling and there's media. Signaling is all the control stuff. This is Lync, saying, hello, this person has now dialed this person, and the gateway says, okay, here's the code. I'm dialing it back. I'll let you know if it answers. They're still ringing, and so on and so forth. A lot of chatter about organization. And then there's the actual media itself. So after signaling is completed and it's time to actually start transmitting voice data, the media stream comes into play. Media bypass, if we step through the slide here, you'll see. Here's a call. So the signal hits the Lync server, then it then signals the PSTN gateway, which then signals out to the PSTN that there's a call. So you can think of signaling as sort of maybe like gestures between a traffic cop, and the actual flow of traffic itself is now the media. So you can see that the media, even in this instance, in just the Sydney office, the media is bypassing the Lync server and going straight from the user to the gateway. Now it knows this because the Lync server has signaled the gateway and said, oh, you support media bypass, I support media bypass, the client supports it. I'm going to tell the client to send his traffic straight to you, and I'd like you to accept it. And they say, sounds good, makes good sense, let's do that. So the media bypasses, which stops a hop in the middle where it has to hit the mediation server and then be retransmitted, shaves a little bit of time off. But in this case, it has to hit the PSTN gateway because the PSTN won't have media bypass. By that I mean you're not going to have a Lync user dialing straight to a cell phone. This will be your kind of your last stop is that PSTN gateway. So that's we bypassed Lync server. Media is going straight to the gateway, and it's going to give you a little bit better voice performance. Now in this example, it's simple, and hopefully it helps us understand clearer. But this, while good, isn't the biggest win for media bypass. Where media bypass can start to really shine is in a situation where, let's say, Sydney lost their Lync pool. We had Lync resiliency configured, so I can now continue to make calls because of the Melbourne pool is still going to facilitate my Lync traffic. But Sydney and Melbourne are pretty far apart. No sweat. Media bypass is going to give us this luxury. So this Lync user makes a call. You can see that it's going to traverse the WAN over to the other Lync pool. The signaling, the Lync pool says, oh, you're making a call. Excellent. Yes, you're in Sydney. I'll go ahead and signal the Sydney gateway to be ready for your call. As mentioned, there you have the go back a slide. So in this example, we've got the call, the signaling traverses the WAN and comes back to the PSTN gateway. The signaling cooperates and says, hey, end user, I need you to send your traffic directly to the gateway. So rather than having the media traverse the WAN all the way to Melbourne, back out the WAN, all the way to the Sydney gateway, and then out to the Sydney PSTN, I've been able to keep my media local by bypassing the entire WAN and the entire Lync infrastructure and just send my media straight to my local gateway, and then from there right out to perhaps a local call in the area. So it's going to maximize voice quality, and while it looks complex on paper, makes hopefully the whole process a lot simpler. And then you can run into a scenario here where you've got maybe your gateway is down. So I've lost there's no X on that, but let's pretend that this is down. This guy is not available for whatever reason. In this case, I make a call, I hit my Lync pool. Pool knows that that gateway is down. It signals over the WAN to the other remote gateway and says, I'm going to tell that gateway to expect a phone call. The cool thing about this is since I have to send my audio over the WAN, you can see this little RTA. Real-time audio is a better protocol for WAN than G711, which is sort of a standard telco protocol. In this instance, I can send RTA over the WAN to a mediation server. The mediation server will then transcode that to 711, which is what the gateway might like. But I'm using a codec that's optimized for the WAN because I have to use the WAN. And because the way that the Lyncs plumbed this all together, it's signaling everything so that the call gets made with the best possible quality. And I don't have to think about this. I don't have to build it. This is something that Lync's going to do, knowing how we've set up the topology and instructed it that, yeah, this is a central site at a different location, so let's maximize it knowing that it's probably not local. And that's the key thing about all of this. None of this was impossible in the past, but it was wildly complex to do, and with Lync it's simplified a great deal. Finally, there's Survivable Branch Appliance. So as this slide, I'm not going to necessarily read the whole thing to you, but these are specific appliances designed and built by third parties for voice resiliency, especially around these kind of smaller branch offices. In every one of these, you'll see two things. Some sort of a gateway, whether it's a SIP gateway, an analog gateway, a PRI gateway, that may be in there. Then in addition to that, you'll have a blade server that's effectively running a version of Lync that is the Survivable Branch server, or in this case, the same code that I mentioned before is part of the Survivable Branch appliance. So it's kind of a two-in-one. And what you get with that is the ability to run Lync in a special Survivable Branch mode on the box itself. So if you had a small office, you could just set a box perhaps in a closet or in a rack somewhere, and that's all that you need. There's not a great deal of server deployment. You can treat it as an embedded system, and it's supported as such. But the difference between Survivable Branch Appliance and just deploying, let's say, a secondary pool at a location is that this is going to be heavily reliant on the front-end pool for all of its user services and management. So if you lose the main pool, resiliency mode is what they will operate in when they're interacting with the SBA. If you deployed a full-scale pool, like a smaller standard edition pool, then they'll have all their user services available to them, even in the event of an outage. But the key thing, what people buy this for, is so that I can have voice resiliency. I can place and receive voice calls in a remote branch during an outage with the WAN or the front-end pool. That's what they're for. That's what they're engineered to do. And you might be saying, well, I don't really have a need for that. Then you have no need for an SBA. Sometimes this seems like a good fit. Then upon further evaluation, maybe not such a good fit because of the way that we interact at that office. Maybe what you're concerned about is keeping that front end pool up all the time. There's resiliency for that as well. But these are targeted at a branch office that's maybe in a remote location, has some voice today. You want to deploy Lync, but you want to keep their local voice in the event of a WAN outage. Enter the Survivable Branch Appliance. So resiliency mode, you'll hear this mentioned a lot when you talk about Lync 2013, especially from competitors saying, oh, the resiliency mode is poor, and it's not designed to be full feature, but let's talk about what it is and what it's for. So resiliency mode is not a standard operating mode by any stretch. It is a kind of an emergency mode for Lync. I'm an end user. I'm signed into my branch site, SBA. This is what you're going to sign into by default. My user services, as I mentioned before, still coming out of that central site. And I'm available. I've got my full Lync. You can see here everything's green. I'm rocking and rolling. I've got all the services. Now I suffer a WAN outage. So my SBA is still up, but the WAN is down. So here the central site is no longer reachable by me. You can see what happens to the Lync client here. It says limited functionality is available due to outage. So you get a notification to the end user straight away that you are in resiliency mode. And in resiliency mode, you're going to be able to do basic phone calling, and that's about it. That's what it's designed to do, is give you phone in the event of an outage. If I or it's so the same thing as if I lost the central site. The central site gets cratered, but the WAN is technically still up, even though the central site pool is gone. SBA says either way, I can't get to those services that I need. You are now in limited functionality mode. The interesting thing is if you lose the SBA because of the nature of Lync, you'll just effectively connect to the central site and you get full functionality of Lync. So the SBA is a gateway and then a special version of Lync that's running in that survivable branch mode. But if you don't have it, you're still okay. You'll be able to sign in and work. Now, if you lost your SBA and your WAN, you wouldn't even have resiliency mode because clearly you have no facility for making or receiving phone calls in that setting. So here's what survivable in voice resiliency mode. Here's what the survivable voice features are. You can see unavailable. It's a pretty significant list. Intersite data, IM app sharing, offline. Conferencing, IM video and web conferencing, offline. Presence, gone. Call forwarding settings are gone. Contact list is missing. Response group, call park, those are gone. So in your client, you'll see effectively a big white box and it says limited functionality. What you get during that time is the ability to do PSTN calling. Thanks to the technology they have called PSTN reroute, you can actually call other Lync sites if the WAN was down because it'll actually dial out on the PSTN into Lync in the central office through the PSTN. So you're still going to make your calls to other potentially internal employees because it's going to know, whoop, I'm going to have to go out to the PSTN because the WAN is down. Still be able to make those calls. Hold, receive, and transfer. You can still authenticate to the SBS or SBA. Your voicemail deposit can still happen via PSTN redirect. Voicemail retrieval can still happen. And then a lot of the call features. So you can see, you're going to, all the features that are available, calling features. And that's the whole point of this. The voice is largely survivable. The only thing that you'll see is response group and call park. That's because those are heavily reliant on the central site. Now, would you necessarily need a response group if you're deploying an SBA? Probably not. That's like a call queue. Be able to put 4 or 5 people in a response group. The people that are behind the SBA are not going to be in that response group. They're not going to get the ring because the central site is still running the response group. That's not distributed. But pretty much all the other call features are available via some mechanism, which is exactly what it was designed to do. So here's an example of voice resiliency, taking advantage of, I've got a couple central sites, I've got a branch site, and the branch site is connected via some sort of a WAN or maybe even just a VPN over the internet. I got somebody out here with a mobile client on their Lync client running on their mobile phone here, and then a full tilt client and maybe like a site device. So in comes a call. Hits the SIP trunk, hits the gateway, hits the Lync server, rings the Lync user. Now another call comes in to a Lync user in the branch site. Similar. Comes in from the trunk, hits the gateway, hits the Lync server, rings through the WAN, rings the Lync user directly. So now let's say we lose one PSTN gateway at central site 1. SIP trunk comes over, finds the other PSTN gateway, which plumbs up to the alternate Lync pool, but because of the nature of Lync, it knows full well that you're on the other side, sends the call to you on DC1, even though. So you've got resiliency by losing a gateway thanks to having 2 sites. Same exact exercise for somebody in the branch site. Call comes in, hits basically the pathway that's up, delivers the call to the end user. So now we've got a scenario where I'm a branch user and the WAN is down. So now what's the call flow going to look like? Well, I've got a Lync mobile client, so you're going to see the SIP trunk come through, hit the PSTN gateway, hit the Lync server. It's going to notice that the WAN's down and I'm not signed in. Send that right back out the Lync Edge server over the internet, which is all TLS secured, and then right to my Lync mobile client. So my endpoint's going to ring, and I might be like surprised that was ringing, but then notice that, oh, the WAN is down. So this call that came in for me up here went right to my mobile device because right now I'm not connected to the central site as I should be. And the interesting thing is once it's routed to that call, I now have the option to send the media itself back out through the PSTN. So I could send it to your cell phone directly through call forwarding. So I get the call on my mobile device, and I say, yeah, I want to answer this on my cell phone. I don't want to take it on my mobile client, or I'm not even using a mobile client. Let's just say I've got a cell phone without Lync Mobile signed in. In this case, it's going to come right in, and then the media itself can go right back out the cellular network or to the mobile client if they're signed in. But Lync's going to give you that kind of flexibility. Now, this is a resiliency scenario that comes up a lot. Is I got people with mobile phones, so I don't need to set up all that resiliency stuff. I can't argue with that. In a world where mobility is so prevalent, making a desk phone ring no matter what might not make a lot of financial sense. If that's the case, here's a scenario where we could say, well, in the event the WAN is down, we'll just have all the calls end up on people's cell phones. Not a problem. And they can actually configure that themselves and choose their numbers and so on and so forth. So when we talk about recommendations for resiliency, as you might guess, central sites should be located at geographically separate locations. If you put in 2 central sites for failover in the same building and you lose the building, that doesn't do you a lot of good. Registrar pools must be configured as backup pools for each other. So basically this means that the pools are paired. There's another bullet for that. But if you've got 2 pools, they have to connect to each other. You can't have like 3 pools and then A failing to B and B failing to C and C failing to A. It's only set up for pairs. Whoops, that was an error click. And then leverage the topology builder and make sure that everything that you're accounting for is being done properly. Sometimes people plan for it, but they don't get into the topology, and then they're under the impression it's working a certain way, but Lync is not aware of that. Pool pairing is critical. If you don't align that properly, if you have pools failing to the wrong pair, or you say, well, any other pool will do, that's not necessarily the case. You want to be able to plan for pool pairing so that your backups and your resiliency plan is going to operate given any kind of an outage, right? Failover routes can be configured in Lync. That comes back to that end-to-end routing, where you can now have a lot more complex routing in Lync 2013. And then you want to have your backup routes use your gateway located at a backup site. This is another one that gets overlooked a lot. People will set up backup routing, but they'll have it pointed at all the main gateways and forget to have things redirected. So you lose the main site, everything fails over to the backup, and then the backup's trying to route calls back to the main site because the backup site didn't get plumbed in properly. And then a central site outage to response groups. I made mention of this. If you lose a remote site that's using an SBA, you're going to lose response group access to that. Thanks to that, it logically follows that if I lose a central site, regardless of failover, I may have an impact to response groups. Depending on the criticality of response groups, how you'll set up call queuing and call routing in that regard, it's definitely something to consider on how you're going to architect your central sites and how they need to fail over to one another. Devices for enterprise voice. I like this picture. I've seen this countless times. So what's wrong? Obviously, you got a guy with headphones sitting in a chair holding his laptop up to his face where the microphone is to talk to someone in a conversation. This does not sell anybody on voice over IP. So it's a little bit about devices, and I know we're getting close to our 11 o'clock mark, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. And we're nearly finished. So we've got Lync optimized handsets. So these are devices that run Lync Phone Edition. In some ways, it feels a little bit dated by now. It came out in 2010. There hasn't been a lot of changes, but it does support the full Lync feature set. It's supported by Microsoft, and it works very well. I wouldn't say don't buy these, but I would definitely say if you're trying to get a rapid deployment that works well, these are the devices to target because they will work. As a general rule, outside of maybe some weird network complexities, these devices work very well. These you'll see marked as Lync compatible handsets. They've passed OIP. They've been certified by Microsoft. The difference between these handsets and the Lync certified handsets, as they call, or optimized handsets, are these don't run Lync Phone Edition. So these are third-party firmware built by Polycom and SNOM that integrate with Lync natively using Lync, proper APIs, and the voice deployment is done in the proper manner. But because it's a third-party firmware, Lync is just one of the many features that it offers. It may give you more benefit, but it may be that the interaction of these isn't as optimal as a Lync Phone Edition software, so you want to trend towards that. My key takeaway here is on this slide there's 7 devices, and on this slide there's 9. There's tons of phones. It's worth your time to get a hold of a few and test them and see which ones you like the best and which ones your end users like the best. And then when you move away from handsets, where I don't really want to do phones anymore, maybe we're moving towards soft phones or tablets or whatever. Now you've got this feel. You've got USB headsets Here you got headphones, USB, single ear, over the ear, Bluetooth speakerphones, and all the way here, down in this lower left corner, this is the CX300, which is a USB desk phone that plugs into your computer, and now you've got a handset you can pick up, shows your presence, shows your caller ID, stuff like that. And then OIP. So you'll hear this cited a lot, and I like to put a slide in here about this because there's a lot of things that you can make work with Lync, but it's important when you start talking about doing an enterprise deployment and you're looking for enterprise reliability, scalability, support, that you think about, at the very least, think about the Open Interoperability Program. So anybody can sign up for this. You basically, I got a product, I'd like it to integrate with Lync. Here's how they want you to do this. The scope is very rich. There's a third-party system that does all this. They test it based on Microsoft's requirements. If you pass the test, you get to stamp, which means Microsoft will support this for you. So if you call up with a device that's OIP'd and you're having an issue, they'll say, oh, well, that's part of the program. We can help you with that. It's a known quantity for us. They've passed the test. It's supposed to work. Let's start doing some troubleshooting. If you start having issues with something that's not part of the OIP, they'll do their best, but at some point they might say, we need you to pull that thing out because I'm not sure what that's doing and it could be causing this issue. So there's a list posted here, this link, and this will be made available after the webinar. But I encourage you to visit that. You'll see there's tons of vendors, tons of options, as well as some configuration information for some of those OIP pieces of hardware or software, and it kind of help you get a leg up on getting things configured. And that's it. I got 10:57, so finished 3 minutes early. If anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. I'll go ahead and unmute the phone call. There's one person, I guess, on the phone. I'll unmute that, so if you have a question, feel free to speak up. And if anyone else wants to type anything, we're here. Nope, that person is a dial tone. And then if you want to submit them another way, that's fine as well.
We'll be sending out the recording via email tomorrow. No problem. So we have a question of, does Lync require or use UM?
That's a great question. So yes and no. I would say my initial reaction to that is, yeah, if you want to handle voicemail, it's going to be reliant on Exchange Unified Messaging. Exchange Unified Messaging is the only voicemail platform that is supported by Lync. So you got to have it. In the event that you don't want voicemail, or you want to just pilot Lync, can you mute that, Mary? Please. Thank you. Sorry about that. Go there. In the event that you didn't care about voicemail, or you just wanted to pilot Lync to test some of the voice functionality, you don't have to have unified messaging. You can definitely turn it on. What you'll see is after 4 rings, it just hangs up. But yeah, when you talk about enterprise deployment, Exchange is necessary to handle voicemail as well as auto attendance. But you can take advantage. Office 365 supports the voicemail deployment as well. So pretty much anywhere you have Exchange, you'll be able to handle your Lync voicemail delivery. Great question. For those of you that are in on the web meeting, if you should be able to call up an IM panel if you're confused as to how people are asking messages.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You said that Lync 2013 introduced voicemail escape. I'm assuming that's like you can hit a button and escape back out of the voicemail into something else?
No, when they ask that term specifically references this phenomenon where someone has their cell phone turned off and their cell phone is turned off and they have forwarding turned on to their cell phone. Prior to voicemail escape, if you've ever called someone with their cell phone off, it basically goes straight into their voicemail without any ringing because the service knows that they're not available. That would trap Lync because it's short of the timeout. So it's watching for 4 rings and then it hangs up and says, I'm not going to dump this in the cellular voicemail. But there was that other end where it's like, well, it picked up right away to voicemail. So voicemail escape is within, I think it's 1.5 seconds by default, but up to 2 seconds of delay at the beginning. If the call is answered super quickly, basically no rings, it'll say, "Nope, that's voicemail. Punt. I need to send it back down to another endpoint, or send it back to their corporate voicemail." Does that make sense?
It does. Okay, so there's not a. So the reason I was asking my question is there's not an escape key to pull yourself back out of voicemail. Um, like if you didn't want to leave a message, you could hit 0 and be transferred back to an operator or something like that.
There is absolutely. When you land in voicemail on Exchange, it has a whole other menuing system that allow you to navigate back and forth, or I want to do something different. But voicemail escape from Lync's perspective is specifically that 2 second latency feature.
Okay. And I have one more question related to that. It may be out of scope, and if it is, I'm fine with you saying so. In the call queues and the call routing and things like that, when you do, the term escapes
Yeah,
me.
response groups.
Thank you. In response groups.
No problem.
In 2010, there wasn't a key that would kick you back out of a queue when you were in a queue holding. Is there in 2013 that you know of?
I don't think that there is. So you're talking about I'm in the queue waiting for a pickup?
Yeah, I'm listening to the background music.
Yeah, there's no back out of that I'm aware of.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
Yep.
Thanks.
A workaround that we do is to run that queue on a small amount of time and have it keep dumping into itself, which you can then have it reprompt for an input every, let's say, 10 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So every 10 seconds it can say, hey, if you're tired of waiting, press 0. If not, talk to you in 10 seconds.
Yeah, I've done that before where you just kind of bounce back and forth between two call responses or interactive response groups.
Yeah, it's probably the best workaround I'm aware of, at least.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Thanks for the questions.
All right, if there's no further questions, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Chris, I want to thank you for presenting. Following the conclusion, we will be sending you a copy of our guide, and just want to let you know we'll also be sending you some information on an upcoming Lunch and Learn we're having here at Apparatus on April 23rd, so we'll provide you more information there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.